The trial of Sean "Diddy" Combs did not open with noise or the kind of spectacle that television often promises. Instead, it began with a silence so sharp, so absolute, that even the faint hum of the ceiling lights seemed like an intrusion. The wooden benches creaked softly as the audience shifted. Reporters shuffled their notes, and lawyers whispered to one another. Yet beneath all of this, there was a heavy, unspoken understanding. Something larger than a trial was unfolding. This was not merely the examination of one man's guilt or innocence. It was the weighing of an empire, the questioning of a legacy, the testing of whether power and fame could shield someone from the judgment of ordinary citizens. The world outside could barely wait. Cameras crowded the courthouse steps. Microphones extended like weapons. News anchors rehearsed their sound bites as if preparing for war. Yet inside, the mood was different. Slower, darker, full of a tension that pressed into the lungs of everyone present. It was as though time itself had been slowed down, every second dragged into eternity as the figure at the center of it all took his place. Sean Combs, once untouchable, once the architect of music, culture, and style, now stood not as a mogul but as a man stripped bare. The tailored suit could not hide the heaviness in his shoulders, nor could the carefully composed expression disguise the fear flickering deep in his eyes. To the jurors, he was both familiar and unfamiliar. An icon they had once known only through music videos and magazine covers, now humanized, vulnerable, reduced to the simplicity of a defendant awaiting judgment. Each of them stared, some with suspicion, some with pity, and others with a kind of conflicted awe, aware that they were participants in a moment that history itself would remember. Yet what they thought, what they truly felt, remained locked away, hidden behind the polite stillness of their faces. The silence of that first morning was not the silence of peace, but the silence of anticipation. It was the pause before thunder, the breath before lightning splits the sky. In that silence, every cough seemed louder, every whisper sharper, every glance heavier. People in the gallery leaned forward as though expecting an explosion, a revelation, a confession. But none came. Instead, what filled the room was uncertainty. An uncertainty so profound that it seemed to have a voice of its own. Was this man guilty, as the world had been told? Was he a victim of enemies who wanted to dismantle his legacy? Or was he something more complicated, existing in that gray space between innocence and guilt where most truths are found? No one could answer yet, and so they waited, eyes locked on the stage where history would soon be written. Truth is a mirror shattered by power. Each piece reflects a different story. Which one belongs to justice? Which one belongs to memory? The trial had only just begun, yet the air already carried the weight of finality. The gavel struck, and its echo rolled across the room like a drumbeat announcing the arrival of war. All eyes turned toward the prosecution, who rose slowly, deliberately, like actors stepping onto a stage that had been prepared for months. And in that moment, the silence cracked, giving way to the words that would shape destiny. The prosecution wasted no time in setting the tone. Rising from their seats, they carried themselves with the confidence of architects who believed they had already built an unshakable case. Their voices rang out across the chamber, measured yet commanding, as they began to lay down a narrative carefully assembled piece by piece. To them, Sean "Diddy" Combs was not merely a musician, not merely a mogul, but a man who had spent years weaving an empire out of shadows. They spoke of secret gatherings behind closed doors, of contracts signed in silence, of transactions that carried more weight than gold. They painted his story not as one of pure ambition and talent but of ambition corrupted by secrecy. Each witness they called was presented as a brick in the structure they were constructing, a structure designed to look undeniable, to appear unbreakable. Evidence appeared in layers, each more dramatic than the last. Photographs were projected on large screens, showing glittering parties that were described as more than celebrations. Recordings were played, voices crackling with static yet heavy with implication. Financial records were produced, numbers circled in red ink like stains of accusation. The prosecution's language was sharp, almost poetic in its certainty, as if the facts themselves had taken an oath to stand against the defendant. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," they declared, "this is not speculation. This is not rumor. These are the building blocks of truth." To the casual observer, it seemed convincing, even overwhelming, as though a verdict was already written. But truth is never so simple. The defense rose like a shadow against the light, calm but unyielding, ready to dismantle the shining structure the prosecution had built. Their words were deliberate, not rushed, carrying the patience of surgeons rather than the urgency of warriors. Where the prosecution had drawn bold, confident lines, the defense reached in with quiet precision and blurred them. "Do not mistake arrangement for accuracy," they warned. "Do not mistake performance for proof." Every photo was questioned. What context was missing? Every recording was challenged. What had been left out? Every financial record was examined. Was it evidence of crime, or merely the complexities of wealth? Slowly, the defense pulled apart the threads of certainty, unraveling the neat picture painted by their opponents. The courtroom shifted with their rhythm. One moment swayed by the prosecution's booming voice, the next leaning into the quiet sharpness of the defense. For the jury, it was less a search for truth and more a test of endurance, as though they were being asked to see two completely different worlds at the same time. In one world, Sean Combs was guilty beyond doubt. In the other, he was a victim of exaggeration and ambition, a man trapped in a narrative he did not write. And so the battle continued, day after day, the prosecution building towers of certainty only for the defense to chip away at their foundations. To the audience, it was a war of words, but to the jury, it was something heavier. A struggle with conscience, a fight with perception, an endless circling of the same haunting questions. What was smoke and what was fire? What was truth and what was only performance? Each answer slipped through their fingers like sand, leaving only doubt in its place. Words can build prisons. Words can tear them down. But justice, fragile justice, lives only in the space between. Amid the storm of accusations, counterarguments, and the endless rhythm of evidence rising and falling, there was one presence that seemed to hover above the chaos without ever uttering a single word: Christian Combs. He was not seated at the defense table, nor did he rise to speak, yet his role in this drama was undeniable. Day after day, he sat quietly in the gallery, his hands clasped, his gaze often fixed upon the wooden floor or the solemn face of his father. Cameras, greedy for emotion, often turned toward him, waiting for a crack, a tear, a visible sign of collapse. But what they captured instead was a mask of silence, an expression carved with restraint, a stillness that said more than words ever could. Christian was no stranger to the spotlight. From the moment he was born, he was known to the world as the son of a giant, a child raised not only in wealth but in the gravity of a name that carried both admiration and controversy. Yet in this room, none of that privilege mattered. Here, he was simply a son, forced to watch his father stripped of power and dignity, forced to endure the spectacle of strangers dissecting the man who had shaped his life. His silence was not indifference. It was survival. Every movement, every flicker of his eyes, every tightening of his jaw could and would be analyzed by the world outside. The safest choice was to remain still, to remain unreadable, even when his heart was breaking. But silence does not mean emptiness. When his father's eyes found his, entire conversations seemed to pass between them without sound. Sean's gaze carried unspoken pleas. Be strong. Do not crumble. Do not give them the satisfaction of seeing us weak. Christian's eyes, however, carried something more fragile. I am trying, but I am not sure how much longer I can bear this. In those fleeting exchanges, the invisible bond of blood, love, and shared suffering revealed itself. The jury may have been deciding one man's fate, but Christian knew that his own life, his own future, would never escape the shadow of this trial. The world beyond those courtroom walls feasted on his silence, spinning it into endless interpretations. Some saw loyalty in his stillness, a son standing by his father, refusing to abandon him even in the darkest hour. Others saw complicity, arguing that silence was itself an answer, a refusal to acknowledge truth. Still others painted him as a victim, trapped by birth into a legacy too heavy for any young man to carry. But none of these headlines captured the true weight pressing down on his chest. They did not capture the ache of watching a parent transform from hero to defendant, from untouchable to accused. They did not capture the loneliness of sitting in plain sight yet feeling invisible, unable to change the course of what was unfolding. Christian's silence grew louder with every passing day, until it became almost unbearable. It was not just the silence of restraint, but the silence of grief, of confusion, of fear. It was the silence of a man torn between two impossible truths, that his father could be guilty, and that his father could be innocent, and that whichever was real, his life would never again be the same. His silence echoed louder than testimony, louder than evidence, louder even than the speeches of lawyers. Because while words can be debated, silence forces the world to imagine what it hides. And imagination, more than any courtroom statement, can haunt forever. The heaviest cries are the ones the world never hears. A son does not shout his pain. He buries it where no one can see. The climax arrived not with a sudden eruption, but with the slow, methodical unveiling of evidence. One by one, boxes were carried into the courtroom, their presence heavier than any spoken word. The prosecution, confident and unrelenting, treated each document, each recording, each photograph as though it were a weapon carefully sharpened for this very moment. Screens flickered to life, showing images that, on the surface, seemed ordinary. Lavish parties, crowded rooms, brief encounters. Yet the prosecution's voice turned each image into accusation, framing them not as snapshots of life, but as glimpses into something darker. Recordings played, crackling with static, sometimes incomplete, yet laden with suggestion. The jurors leaned forward, their eyes narrowing, as if trying to decipher the truth hidden within the noise. Was it evidence of guilt, or simply fragments twisted into narrative? The defense, refusing to surrender, countered with precision. They dissected every timestamp, every missing frame, every gap in context. They warned the jury against being seduced by presentation, against mistaking the glow of a projector for the light of truth. Do not mistake performance for proof, they repeated, turning the courtroom into a battlefield where every fact had two faces. Every truth carried its shadow. The tension grew unbearable. Some jurors seemed convinced, their faces hardening with resolve. Others appeared restless, their eyes flicking between prosecution and defense, caught in the grip of doubt. The climax arrived not with a sudden eruption, but with the slow, methodical unveiling of evidence. One by one, boxes were carried into the courtroom, their presence heavier than any spoken word. The prosecution, confident and unrelenting, treated each document, each recording, each photograph as though it were a weapon carefully sharpened for this very moment. Screens flickered to life, showing images that, on the surface, seemed ordinary. Lavish parties, crowded rooms, brief encounters. Yet the prosecution's voice turned each image into accusation, framing them not as snapshots of life, but as glimpses into something darker. Recordings played, crackling with static, sometimes incomplete, yet laden with suggestion. The jurors leaned forward, their eyes narrowing, as if trying to decipher the truth hidden within the noise. Was it evidence of guilt, or simply fragments twisted into narrative? The defense, refusing to surrender, countered with precision. They dissected every timestamp, every missing frame, every gap in context. They warned the jury against being seduced by presentation, against mistaking the glow of a projector for the light of truth. Do not mistake performance for proof, they repeated, turning the courtroom into a battlefield where every fact had two faces. Every truth carried its shadow. The tension grew unbearable. Some jurors seemed convinced, their faces hardening with resolve. Others appeared restless, their eyes flicking between prosecution and defense, caught in the grip of doubt. For the first time, Sean Combs' composure began to waver. He sat back in his chair, his breathing deep, his eyes closing for brief moments as though searching for strength, or perhaps resigning himself to what was inevitable. Christian's gaze followed him constantly, his hands gripping the bench so tightly his knuckles turned pale. Evidence or not, guilt or innocence, this trial was dismantling their lives piece by piece, stripping them of certainty and leaving only fragments behind. The room itself seemed to hold its breath, as though the walls were listening, waiting for the final judgment. Then came the verdict. The jury filed back into the room, 12 faces marked by exhaustion, their silence louder than the gavel that had summoned them. The foreman's voice trembled slightly as he read the decision, and in that instant the world split in two. Some in the gallery gasped, others broke into tears, while flashes from cameras immortalized the exact second when Sean Combs' destiny shifted. Outside, chaos exploded, crowds screamed. Reporters shouted, headlines surged across glowing screens, justice served, for some, justice denied, for others. The streets became an extension of the courtroom, each voice demanding to own the story. But inside, it was quieter, heavier, almost unbearable in its stillness. Sean's expression revealed nothing, his face frozen between defiance and surrender. Christian shook silently, eyes locked on his father, carrying pain he could not speak. The judge's gavel struck once more. This court is adjourned. And yet, even with those words, nothing felt resolved. A verdict had been given, but the truth remained elusive, hiding in the shadows between guilt and innocence, between power and downfall, between the stories we are told and the secrets we will never know. A trial may end with a verdict, but a story never ends with silence. History writes in ink, but memory burns in fire. Sean Combs was led away, no longer the untouchable mogul, no longer just the architect of an empire, but a man forever changed by the judgment of others. For some, he was guilty. For others, a victim. For all, he was something more complicated, proof that power does not grant immunity from the questions that haunt us all. And as the doors of the courtroom closed behind him, one truth lingered above all others. Endings in this world are never truly endings. They are only beginnings, disguised as conclusions, reborn in whispers, debates, and memories that will echo long after the gavel's final strike.